You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Sinner. Is it time to put away the pens and paper and give all pupils and teachers their own iPad? Well, one secondary school in Bolton in Lancashire is doing just that. The ESSA Academy is the first school in the UK to roll out the Apple devices, including iPads, iPods and MacBooks. Pupils take tests on their iPads with results sent to the teacher's tablet for marking. And some marks are given instantly, for example when multiple choice tests are set, cutting down the teacher's workload. And the head teacher of ESSA Academy say they've also reduced their annual photocopying bill from £80,000 to just £15,000. Well, joining me for today's discussion is Anne Thunhurst from JISC Advance, an organisation helping to improve performance and efficiency in schools through the use of technology. David Weston is the chief executive of the charity the Teacher Development Trust. Peter Rudd is a reader in education at the Institute for Effective Education. And joining us on the phone is Chris Williams, a primary school teacher. We'll begin with you, Anne Thunhurst from JISC Advance. Is this just a natural progression onto iPads?
If the UK is to maintain its position as a world leader, then yes, I do think there does need to be a progression from old technology, traditional technology, to newer technologies. But I don't necessarily think that then makes traditional technologies redundant. And I'm using the word technologies in traditional terms to mean books. No, I don't think the age of the book is dead. I do think that they have their place in education, but we need to be careful which technology we use and be clear about what we're intending to achieve by the use of that particular technology.
David Weston from the Teacher Development Trust, what are your thoughts? Is this just a natural progression like we moved on from slate and the scraper?
I'm not necessarily sure it is. I think there are the key elements of education have got to be that you've got to ask children challenging questions. You've got to provide them really effective feedback of how well they're doing. You've got to be able to model what are the right things that they need to do, give them chances to explore new areas and enable really good quality peer discussion. I think you don't have to have an iPad in order to do that. I think sort of the key elements of education are those. So simply saying, oh, well, if we move on to iPad, everything will be better is not necessarily the case. That said, there are some things that you've already mentioned that immediate feedback you can get with technology can improve things. At the same time, if you're restricting it to multiple choice questions or restricting it to assessments that can be carried out on a tablet, you are sort of restricting the information that students can provide to teachers. So I think there are pros and cons.
Peter Rudd from the Institute for Effective Education.
Well, I think it is progress in the sense that if you can move towards one-to-one pupils with iPads, that's a good thing. But on the other hand, you certainly can't just drop the technology into a school and expect it to work. You need to let the learning lead the technology and not the other way around. So I'd like to know if the school is evaluating this properly and seeing how it works.
Chris Williams, you're a primary school teacher. What are your thoughts?
I'm in agreement with the other members of the panel. I'm in a fortunate position that I've been involved for almost 2 years with a one-to-one rollout of iPads and iPods in a primary classroom. We put a lot of thought into what we wanted to achieve from it and what we expected the children to be able to do with the technology. And I would say we've had quite a lot of success in terms of pupil progress and standards, but not simply with the technology. We've found that reading levels have gone up, standards of writing have gone up, speaking and listening progress has increased, and all of this is with traditional means, with pencil and paper, with books, with the technology on the side. So I do believe that if outcomes are clear, if intentions are planned properly, the technology can effectively enhance progress across the curriculum. We've seen a great deal of success that we've been able to report as we've gone along from day one on an internet blog. So we've kind of tracked the progress. The school itself monitors the levels of the children to evaluate the effectiveness of the program that we've introduced. Everything is moving in the right direction. Before we started, our children were below average expectations in all subjects, and a year on, that's changed. They're performing above average across the board. So it's been hard work to implement, but I think with foresight, it can be extremely successful.
David Weston, you just heard some great feedback there from Chris Williams about how this has created such progress, and you've seen it reflected in results as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic to hear, that school has made some real progress. I guess I'd like to just play devil's advocate a little bit, really, and say that if you're going to be spending tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands on iPads or any other technology in schools, then I wonder if schools generally know if they're going to do this. Might there have been another way they could have spent the money and get similar effects? Now, my suspicion is that in Chris's school, one of the things that's been really effective is teachers have been sitting down together and having conversations about what is making learning happen, and they're using the technology to find out where are the problems in the learning, how can teachers work together to make things better. I'm not necessarily sure you always need technology to do that. That might have been the catalyst in this case, but there's some fantastic research out at the minute by the Education Endowment Foundation, and they've got a research toolkit that suggests that actually one of the best things you can do is simply get teachers to talk to each other about giving better feedback, as in, a child says, this is my answer, and actually by giving feedback that specifically explains what was the problem with their answer and how they can move on, actually, that's a really cheap and simple way you can massively improve things. So I think we can get carried away and say, spend some money, let's get some technology. It's not always the best thing to do. And that's not to, view negatively anything that Chris has been doing, because I suspect that a lot of that good work has been happening at the same time.
Well, let's bring in Anne Thunhurst from JISC Advanced. Is this really a great way to help schools at a time when they're being told to cut back their budgets during a recession?
I think there are two very important points that have just come out of the discussion to date. Firstly, Chris's point about the introduction of iPads, and alongside the introduction of iPads, they were very clear about what they wanted to achieve. And the evidence is showing us that the organisations who are simply going out buying tranches of iPads or tranches of any devices without having a clear strategy and being absolutely clear with the staff and the learners about why they're buying them, what they want to achieve, and how they're going to measure the impact of the use of that device. To a certain extent, why bother to use technology? They may have a slight improvement they may improve learning to a degree, but they certainly won't be used to their optimum capacity. But the second point that I'd like to raise is I don't understand why, unless it's the cool factor, iPads and iPods are being singled out. I think we should be looking more widely, and I think that we should be looking at the learning and the pedagogies that we want to occur within our schools and within the whole of the education sector. It's not just schools.
But do you accept that these tablet devices, whether they are iPads, whether they're from Samsung, they are effective and they are the best way forward? There's been concerns raised by David about whether the effectiveness that we've heard from Chris is that it's just because teachers are sitting around together as a result of having the iPads.
To answer the question directly, the best way forward, not necessarily. I go back to my original point. The organisation needs to be clear about what they want to achieve, but certainly there are significant benefits in the significant benefits in the use of technology, and the research from the University of Hull that was commissioned by Scotland Schools is quite clear about the use of iPads and the improvements that the use of iPads have made within schools across Scotland per se.
Well, I think now's a good time to pick up on that research from Hull, because they did find there's greater motivation, there's greater engagement. Let's go to Peter Rudd from the Institute for Effective Education. We've heard such great things out of that research. What are your thoughts about picking up from that?
That's undoubtedly a very good piece of research, but if you look at research on ICT in general, I only know of one or two studies which find a proven link between technologies and improved attainment. So it's very difficult to prove that it's a causal factor in improving attainment of children. Having said that, it does have an effect. There's some studies that have given it an effect size of 0.25, I believe. So what that means in common language is it does have some effect. It's more powerful than, for example, the influence of setting homework, but it doesn't have as much effect as teacher style. So it's actually the quality of the teacher which is far more important than the use of technology. That's not to say that technology hasn't got the potential. It really has, and Chris's school is obviously an example of what can be done.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Sinner. Joining me for today's discussion is Anne Thunhurst from JISC Advance, an organisation helping to improve performance and efficiency in schools through the use of technology. David Weston is the Chief Executive of the charity the Teacher Development Trust. Peter Rudd is a reader in education at the Institute for Effective Education. And joining us on the phone is Chris Williams, a primary school teacher. Chris Williams, if we go to you, your school has obviously implemented this technology and it's working very well, but we all are constantly told that parents need to keep an eye on how long and their kids are on this kind of technology. How have you ensured that kids aren't staring at iPads all day?
Well, the issue of the technology and how they use it, we give the children integrated projects where the technology will play a part, and it may be in terms of producing a presentation or some research, but there remains an element of pencil and paper work, of speaking and listening, of practical and creative activities. So we've combined projects together, and really the technology is used as and when required. For instance, one of the things we use to great effect in mathematics is we have a weekly assessment of our children, and areas that come out as being problematic in the assessment, the children use their iPods to access videos, teacher videos, explaining and giving them examples of problems to help them in areas mathematically, multiplication, division problems, etc. And then when that's done, and they've gone through that instruction, then it's back to the textbook and back into the traditional learning. It's like having a teacher by their side, which has been very effective. We've found, because we plan the use, the children don't just simply immerse themselves in the technology. At home, I do suspect things may be different, because there isn't always the same direction given in terms of what the children are expected to do.
David Weston from the Teacher Development Trust. We've just heard how Chris sees schools, and his school uses these in tandem. You use textbooks alongside iPads. Some schools won't be doing that. Indeed, the ESSA Academy headlined at the beginning of this conversation, they don't. They've replaced everything with iPads. Is that quite worrying for you?
It is a little worrying for me. I think one of the things, teachers go into the classroom and they develop a certain set of habits. You've got sort of thousands of bits of information flying at you every minute as a teacher, and you've got to learn to filter that, and you begin to do everything instinctively. You learn through the years of teaching, certain ways of doing things. If someone then comes in and says, right, okay, all the things you're comfortable with doing, all the ways you've developed, we're going to chuck that out the window and you're going to completely use this new system now, I think there's inevitably going to be a drop in teaching quality there, because teachers won't have that instinct to know how to respond to things. They won't be looking for those telltale signs so easily. They won't be so comfortable yet with picking up the data in the way that they might do just visually.
Do you see a health problem as well, not only from staring at a screen, but also the lack of interpersonal skills?
Well, potentially. I think actually one of the things I notice, even if I just look at my nephews when they're using an iPad, is they talk to each other a lot, potentially argue with each other. But I don't think there's any reason why there shouldn't be interaction while using it, because you can still have one iPad and then people having a discussion around it, or several iPads and people sending work to each other, etc. I think, just to come back to a moment to the point about why iPads and why tablets, for me, I think it's the massive advantage they've got is you click a button and they're on and they're just there. When you look at the last decade, there was up to £500 million a year being spent on computing equipment in schools, and much of that was on interactive whiteboards. Now, they were very interesting. I mean, I taught for 9 years myself, and it used to be the bane of my life, actually, the interactive whiteboard. I would go into the classroom and go, oh, this is the one which doesn't work very reliably. And I could spend 3 or 4 minutes, if necessary, just trying to get it figured out and getting it calibrated so that when I clicked, actually the mouse appeared in the right area. What I mostly ended up doing was just writing on it the way I would write on a normal board. Now, when you consider the reliability of that, if it takes me 3 minutes, then actually multiply that by 30 kids, then suddenly there's 90 minutes of learning time that are just gone because I've been fiddling around with the equipment. Now, with an iPad, click a button and it's on. So I think there is an advantage with that, and I think that's one of the reasons why people talk about tablets and iPads, and I think that's helpful. But back to your point about, is it a worry? Well, yeah, actually, you've got to give teachers time to change the way they teach. You can't just suddenly go, right, I've been excited about this idea, let's go tech. Because all the research on how teachers change their habits shows that it takes hours and hours and hours. I mean, if it takes the classic figure of 10 years to become an expert, then if you spent 5 years as a teacher, it seems a shame to suddenly go, right, we're going to play a different sport now, effectively.
And Thunhurst, have you seen that? Obviously, you help schools use technology to increase performance. How easy is it for some teachers to pick up technology? Not everyone is going to be as savvy as others.
We support the whole range of education from 5 to 19. And I think that the implementation of technology within any organisation requires core support and it brings me back to my point, it needs to be part of a core strategy. And that strategy needs to recognise that if one is going to receive the maximum return on investment for the use of technology, it can't just be dropped into a classroom and left the staff and learners left to get on with it.
Does it take as long as David thought?
How long is a piece of string? The advantage of technology is that it can truly personalise learning. It means that we need to reflect on our traditional pedagogical approach and ask if that still fits. Is that still suitable for the new world that we are entering and, more importantly, the learners are entering? We are going to be facing a world that is technology driven, but people still learn differently. They still learn in different ways. Some learners may learn more effectively with technology, with iPads. Others may learn more effectively with books. But I would ask the question, why are we trying to impose a pedagogical model that is changing to the use of technology? Surely this provides us with a platform to look at our whole pedagogical approach and say, OK, we've got technology now. It's another tool in our toolbox. What will it allow us to do that we couldn't do before?
Chris Williams, let's get an answer from you.
I'm in complete agreement with what Anna's just said, and going back to a point David made earlier about the planned implementation of the technology. We have a very, very strong technology coordinator in school, David Andrews, and he's led the way with the technology, but has put professional development at a centre. So as a staff, like David pointed out, we've put together a cohesive professional development plan across the school that is allowing the teachers to embrace the incorporation of the technology and have a sense of ownership. So the teachers are learning as they go. In terms of the pedagogy, we would always be striving to find the best way that children can learn anyway, and always have done as teachers. And the technology we've been able to embrace with what works. The biggest success for me, I would say, has been just watching the children grow in terms of their language, in terms of their communication and their independence. The learning that you see, it almost happens on its own now. What
do you put in place to stop children from going on inappropriate websites or playing games at school?
Well, we do a lot of learning through games. The children make their own games. We use games to support progress in mathematics. There's the Angry Birds game, where the children use the scores to solve place value problems. There's a motorbike racing game where they write stories about the experience. But we're at school, and rules are rules. When it's time to not be playing a game, and if a child is caught playing a game, and it does happen, then they will lose access to the technology. We would say, well, you've lost that privilege for the remainder of the day. It wasn't time to play games.
But if I'm sitting in the corner and the teacher's on the opposite side of the room, what's to stop me from going on an inappropriate website or downloading a non-educational game?
Well, we've got filters across the school's wireless network, so any inappropriate website or search engine would be blocked. We do tend to check the content of the iPods and what's on the screen across the day. I couldn't guarantee that there's ever been a child that's had a little sneaky play on Temple Run and got away with it. But by and large, the children's activities are so motivating and engaging that they're using the technology for what they're supposed to do. If you were to see it in action and see how the technology is being used, there really isn't time to play games, and probably the activities we're giving them in the classroom are more engaging.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Sinner. Joining me for today's discussion is Anne Thunhurst from JISC Advance, an organisation helping to improve performance and efficiency in schools through the use of technology. David Weston is the Chief Executive of the charity the Teacher Development Trust. Peter Rudd is a reader in education at the Institute for Effective Education. And joining us on the phone is Chris Williams, a primary school teacher. Peter Rudd from the Institute for Effective Education. Chris Williams saying that obviously this technology is engaging. How do you see this being rolled out in the future? If you go down the negative side, there's a worry you could see a whole hall full of students all sitting behind desks with one teacher at the front.
Yes, it's got some very interesting implications for teaching, I think. But I think it comes back to the point that has been made previously that the best forms of learning are blended learning, so that you've got some use of technologies and some other teaching techniques, teaching and learning techniques. So I think you need that combination, and therefore you'll always need a teacher. You can't just completely independently leave a pupil, at least a young pupil, with an iPad, want to become more independent.
A secondary school, surely you could just have, if you're doing a multiple choice exam, or if you're just lecturing from the front of the hall.
Yes, it doesn't rule out those developments, and instant feedback is a very good thing that David mentioned. That the pupils know immediately how they're doing, and the teacher can monitor the level of achievement of pupils within a lesson, and that kind of initiative is, there are definitely positive things going on, but what I'm saying is, if you're having this large-scale kind of change, it needs change management. It needs core support, which Anne mentioned, but it also needs change management. And to give you an example of that, VLEs, virtual learning environments, were dropped into schools very quickly so that they all had a VLE, but we did a survey at the time, and more than half of teachers didn't know their school had a VLE, so it needed some support to go with it, to tell teachers what a VLE is and how they can use it.
David Weston from the Teacher Development Trust. We look at this from an outsider and we think, we're going to drop in a load of iPads, iPods and MacBooks and everything. It's going to change. But how difficult is it from inside of school to kind of embrace this technology?
It can be very. Change management, as Pete said, is very difficult. How do you actually create a change in schools? Well, it generally tends to be one person's very excited about it because they have a rationale, because I'm very excited, and that's fine. Unfortunately, not everyone else will have that same rationale. The reason that person wakes up in the morning and gets excited around iPads might not be the same reason that someone else gets up in the morning because they're worried about, children getting fantastically engaged with art, or who want to be really motivated by science, or they've got particular kids with learning difficulties they want to deal with. So when you get the person coming and saying, great, I've got a solution to this problem, someone else says, well, that's not my problem. That's your problem. That's your excitement. And actually, now you're just telling me to change what I do and what I'm excited about. So you have to spend a long time getting buy-in. Going back to what you were asking Chris, could someone be playing around in the corner? Children have always been messing around in the corner. They might have been doodling with bits of paper, or But
it's a bit more dangerous if you've got access to the internet, isn't it? Though.
Yes, I suppose it could be dangerous if you've got issues with content. But at the same time, you could say, well, whereas when I was a kid and doodling in a corner, actually I was completely switched off and blanked out, or maybe drawing a stick man. Whereas actually now I might be looking up something interesting, vaguely related, or I might be going on, zooming through Wikipedia. So it could be dangerous, it could be good. One of the really bad reasons, I think, for using technology in classrooms is to say we're moving into the 21st century and we will be using lots of technology, so we need to use technology. The reason I think that's bad, and this is a controversial point, I know, and not everyone will agree with me, but there are lots of fantastically tech-literate people and programmers and all sorts of people who learned at schools using textbook and paper. And they managed to succeed that perfectly well. In fact, it's one of those points that's made a lot, 21st century jobs and jobs that haven't been invented yet, and we've got to get our young people ready for that. But the education system has always got people ready for jobs that they're, haven't been invented. And somehow we've managed to do it in the past by just teaching them, in rows and pen and paper and so on. So I don't think that's the right reason to choose. I think the right reason is that technology can enable you to do really exciting feedback and interactive things that we were never able to do before.
Chris Williams?
I completely agree again. I've come out of class this morning and I've been the teacher. My children have needed the teacher. The level of independence is considerably higher, and we talk as colleagues here that we've become the guide on the side, if you like. We're able to work with groups, or we're able to help children with just that little bit of extra direction.
Do you find that they are more engaged for independent learning? Do they find that more attractive now?
Completely. If I give you an example of how we teach science currently, we give the children the objectives that they need to know. We've taught them the investigation skills, and it might be light. These are the things you need to know to achieve level 4, level 5 light. They go away on their own, and it's their task to demonstrate their understanding. So they sometimes come back with songs, with oral presentations, with books they've made on the iPad, with movies, with comic strip, which is all given back to others in terms of a presentation which they can receive feedback on. Like this year already, I've been able to assess all of my science group at level 5, which I've never been able to do at this stage in the term before, and that's well above average for a primary school child. I would normally be expecting most of them to achieve level 4, and I put it down to their independent learning, that they've been given the challenge. You need to know this. Off you go and prove it. You've got the tools, and they do need a little bit of support along the way. But the independence really seems to raise the bar in terms of what they can achieve.
Well, the only person not nodding at the moment is David Weston.
No, I do agree actually that you can use this technology to assess people and move them on. I think in Chris's case it's obviously worked really well, but it's just like I guess it's difficult because I still don't think there's necessarily evidence that it is because of the technology that's there. That's leading to the improved results.
Peter Rudd.
The survey that I mentioned previously of teachers, we also carried out a survey of pupils at the same time, and we asked them a question along the lines of, do you enjoy learning with technology, and do you think it will improve your learning? And around 70% said yes, and around 10% weren't sure, but that left 20% who expressed some negative view, and around 20% also said we use technology too much. And I think there's a danger of that school in Lancashire coming across that approach. I'm sure they're thinking about how they implement it and what else to do alongside it. And I understand they haven't banned pens. People can still use pens in that school as well as iPads and laptops. So there's a big issue. I think the pupils will tell us if technology's going too far, and it's not the only way to learn. There are many ways to learn.
Anne Thunhurst, what about that 20%?
My view is that if, despite whether we can prove a causal link or not, if the introduction of technology, whatever it is, makes organisations and staff and students, learners, focus on their strategies, their pedagogy, and that results in improved teaching and results in improved achievement, does it matter if we are getting the improvement, if we are ensuring that our learners are equipped for employability and to take UK PLC forward? Does it really matter if it's technology, or does it really matter if it's a book? People learn in different ways, and if we find the key to unlock how they're learning, surely that's what our education industry is about.
Well, I think that's a perfect time to end this discussion. Thank you very much to all of my guests. Anne Thunhurst from JISC Advance. David Weston is the Chief Executive of the charity, the Teacher Development Trust. Peter Rudd is a Reader in Education at the Institute for Effective Education. And joining us on the phone was Chris Williams, a primary school teacher. Thunhurst from JISC Advance. Is this just a natural progression onto iPads?
If the UK is to maintain its position as a world leader, then yes, I do think there does need to be a progression from old technology, traditional technology, to newer technologies. But I don't necessarily think that then makes traditional technologies redundant. And I'm using the word technologies in traditional terms to mean books. No, I don't think the age of the book is dead. I do think that they have their place in education, but we need to be careful which technology we use and be clear about what.
And some marks are given instantly, for example when multiple choice tests are set, cutting down the teacher's workload. And the head teacher of Esser Academy say they've also reduced their annual photocopying bill from £80,000 to just £15,000. Well, joining me for today's discussion is Anne Thunhurst from JISC Advance, an organisation helping to improve performance and efficiency in schools through the use of technology. David Weston is the Chief Executive of the charity the Teacher Development Trust. Peter Rudd is a Reader in Education at the Institute for Effective Education. And joining us on the phone is Chris Williams, a primary school teacher. We'll begin with you, Anne. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Sinner. Is it time to put away the pens and paper and give all pupils and teachers their own iPad? Well, one secondary school in Bolton in Lancashire is doing just that. The ESSA Academy is the first school in the UK to roll out the Apple devices, including iPads, iPods and MacBooks. Pupils take tests on their iPads with results sent to the teacher's tablet for marking.
We're intending to achieve by the use of that particular technology.
David Weston from the Teacher Development Trust, what are your thoughts? Is this just a natural progression like we moved on from slate and the scraper?
I'm not necessarily sure it is. I think there are the key elements of education have got to be that you've got to ask children challenging questions, you've got to provide them really effective feedback of how well they're doing, you've got to be able to model what are the right things that they need to do, give them chances to explore new areas and enable really good quality peer discussion. I think you don't have to have an iPad in order to do that. I think sort of the key elements of education are those. So simply saying, oh, well, if we move on to iPad, everything will be better is not necessarily the case. That said, there are some things that you've already mentioned that immediate feedback you can get with technology can improve things. At the same time, if you're restricting it to multiple choice questions or restricting it to assessments that can be carried out on a tablet, you are sort of restricting the information that students can provide to teachers. So I think there are pros and cons.
Peter Rudd from the Institute for Effective Education.
Well, I think it is progress in the sense that if you can move towards one-to-one pupils with iPads, that's a good thing. But on the other hand, you certainly can't just drop the technology